The day I found out my retirement account had a zero balance, I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just sat down at my kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, and stared at the number on my laptop screen until my coffee went cold and a fly landed on the rim of the mug and I didn't even notice. $211,000. 22 years of overtime, of skipped vacations, of turning down job offers because the 401k match was better where I was. Gone. And the woman who did it was upstairs, humming while she folded laundry, like nothing in the world was wrong. My name is Daniel Ellis. I'm 44 years old. I've worked at the same manufacturing plant since I was 22, starting on the floor running a stamping press and working my way up to plant supervisor over 2 decades. I'm not a rich man. I never wanted to be. I wanted to retire at 60, buy a small cabin near Lake Erie, and take my grandkids fishing someday. That was the whole plan. Simple, honest, mine. I need you to understand who I was before all of this, because the man in this story isn't the man I used to be. I used to be the guy at the plant who other men brought their problems to. Not because I had all the answers, but because I never judged anyone and I never repeated what they told me. My supervisor once called me the most predictable man in this building, and he meant it as the highest compliment a man like him could give. I showed up early. I left late when it mattered. I coached Tyler's Little League team for 6 years, every practice, every rained-out Saturday rescheduled without complaint. I never missed a school play, even the ones where Emma had exactly one line and forgot half of it. I married Diane 15 years ago. She was warm back then, funny, sharp, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order the second time she met you and used it to make you feel like you mattered. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I remember thinking, watching her laugh at something across the yard, that I wanted to hear that laugh for the rest of my life. We built something real together. A modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Court with a crooked basketball hoop over the garage. 2 kids, Tyler, 14 now, who plays baseball like his life depends on it, and Emma, 11, who wants to be a veterinarian and has opinions about every stray cat in the neighborhood. Every Sunday we had dinner at 6, no phones at the table, a rule I insisted on and everyone secretly liked. Every August we drove to Cedar Point, and Diane always got sick on the same roller coaster and swore every year she wouldn't ride it again. I tell you all this not to make myself sound like a saint. I made mistakes too. Some years I worked too much. I wasn't always the husband I should have been in the small ways, forgetting to notice when Diane was exhausted, letting a compliment go unsaid too many nights in a row. But I never once touched a dollar that wasn't mine to touch. That's the one thing I always believed about myself, the one thing I built my whole identity around. Honest work, honest money, a man who kept his word. So when I opened that account and saw zero, my first thought wasn't betrayal. It was fear. I actually thought we'd been hacked. My hands were shaking a little as I called the bank before I even called upstairs to Diane. The woman on the phone was kind, but her voice had that careful, rehearsed calm people use when they already know the news is bad, and they've delivered it 100 times before to 100 other stunned husbands and wives. Mr. Ellis, this account had 2 authorized users. A withdrawal of $211,000 was processed roughly 6 weeks ago, transferred to an account under the name Diane Ellis, then wired out in 4 separate transactions over an 11-day period. 4 transactions, not one panicked withdrawal, not one desperate mistake made in a moment of weakness. 4 spaced out, careful, deliberate. Someone had planned this the way you plan a house renovation with a timeline. I sat there a long time before I went upstairs. I remember looking around my own kitchen, the coffee maker Diane bought me for my 40th birthday, the crayon drawing Emma had taped to the fridge 2 years ago that we never took down, the calendar with Tyler's game schedule circled in red, and thinking that everything in this room had been paid for, one way or another, by money I had earned an hour at a time on a factory floor. And somewhere out there, all of it, 2 decades of it, had vanished into someone else's hands. "Hey," Diane said, not even turning around from the dresser when I walked into our bedroom. "Dinner's almost ready. Can you get Tyler off that game?" I looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you're trying to see if you ever really knew them at all, searching her face for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "Diane," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, "where's the retirement money?" Her hand stopped moving, just for a second. But I saw it, the way you notice a single frame skip in a movie that's playing too fast for anyone else to catch. What are you talking about? The account is empty. $211,000, gone 6 weeks ago. She turned around slowly, and I watched her decide, right in front of me, whether to keep lying or start telling the truth. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. It's not gone, Danny. It's with my mom temporarily. I didn't understand at first. I actually laughed, a short, confused laugh because my brain genuinely couldn't process the sentence. With your mom. Kevin's business needed capital, you know that. The restaurant was going to close. Mom said if we didn't help, they'd lose everything, and I couldn't just let that happen to my own family, Danny. You don't understand what it's like to watch your brother lose everything he's worked for. Our retirement, I said quietly, each word landing like a stone. You gave our retirement to your brother's restaurant. It's an investment. He's paying it back with interest. Show me the paperwork. She didn't answer that. And in that silence, I felt something in me go very still and very cold, like a machine powering down for the night. I want you to understand something about me. I don't raise my voice. I never have, not once in 15 years of marriage. My own father was a yeller, a good man underneath it, but a yeller. And I promised myself as a boy standing in a hallway listening to him shake the walls that I would never be a man whose family flinched when he walked into a room. So I didn't yell that night either. I just asked one more question, the one that mattered most. Did you sign my name on anything? Diane's silence answered before her words did. I had power of attorney from when you had your knee surgery 2 years ago. It was never formally revoked. I didn't think it mattered because I was going to put it all back before you ever noticed. I walked out of that bedroom and didn't say another word to her for 2 days. Not out of cruelty. I simply didn't trust myself to speak yet, and more than that, I didn't trust her to tell me the truth if I asked in anger. I needed to think. I needed to become, for a little while, a different kind of man than the one who trusted easily. Over those 2 days, small memories started rearranging themselves in my mind, the way puzzle pieces suddenly reveal a different picture than you thought you were building. The new car Diane's mother, Carol, had bought back in the spring, paid in cash. When Carol had been telling everyone for years that money was tight since Walt's hours got cut at the plant supply company. Kevin's restaurant, Ridgeline Grill, which had reopened with a fresh coat of paint, a new sign, and a remodeled dining room right around the time our joint checking account had looked strange to me for one single month, before Diane told me she'd moved some things around for tax purposes, and I, trusting fool that I was, had simply nodded and gone back to my own work. The way Diane had started taking phone calls out in the garage instead of the kitchen where she used to sit while she talked. The way she'd quietly stopped asking me to sit down with her every first Sunday of the month to go over the finances together. A 10-year habit that had simply and silently ended sometime last winter, and I hadn't even noticed it was gone. I wasn't imagining a pattern. I had been living peacefully inside one, the way a man sleeps soundly in a house that's slowly filling with smoke he can't smell yet. On the 3rd day, I didn't confront her again. Instead, I drove to my credit union on my lunch break and asked for every statement, every transfer record, every signature on file going back 8 months. I requested copies of the power of attorney document itself. The branch manager, a soft-spoken man named Roberto, who I'd known for years from opening the plant's payroll accounts, looked at me with something like pity as he printed the pages. Danny, he said, sliding the folder across the counter, I have to tell you, when I saw this come through 6 weeks ago, something about it didn't sit right with me. 4 transactions in 11 days, all just under the reporting threshold our system flags for manual review. That's not how someone withdraws money for an emergency. That's how someone withdraws money so it doesn't get noticed. That single sentence from Roberto changed everything for me. It wasn't just Diane panicking to help her family. Someone had studied how the system worked. Someone had planned around it. I bought a plain black notebook at a gas station that night, the kind with no logo, no lines that mattered, nothing special about it at all. I wrote everything down inside it, dates, numbers, names, small suspicious moments I'd remembered. That notebook became the most important object I owned. I carried it in my truck, never in the house, tucked under the seat where Diane would never think to look, because some part of me already understood that I was no longer just her husband. I was building a case. I also called my cousin Marcus, who's a paralegal in Columbus and the only person in my family who'd ever actually read a legal document for fun. I didn't tell him everything yet. I just asked him one careful question over the phone, standing outside in my own driveway so Diane couldn't hear through the window. If someone used an expired power of attorney to move money out of a retirement account without the other spouse's knowledge, is that a crime? Marcus went quiet for a second, and I could hear him set something down on his desk. Depends on the state, depends on the account type, depends on whether it's titled as marital property or separately held. But Danny, if it's what I think you're asking, yeah, that's serious. That's not a family disagreement anymore. That's forgery and potentially fraud, and if other people knowingly received the funds, they could be exposed too. I didn't tell him to do anything yet. I just said thank you and hung up, and I stood in my driveway for a long moment looking up at the light in Tyler's bedroom window, thinking about what kind of father I wanted to be through whatever was coming next. That weekend, Tyler had a baseball game, and I went, because I wasn't going to let what was happening at home touch my son's Saturday. I sat in the bleachers and cheered when he struck a boy out in the fourth inning, and for 2 hours I let myself just be a father watching his son play the game he loved. Diane sat 3 rows down, and Carol, her mother, was beside her. I watched Carol laugh at something on her phone, entirely comfortable, entirely untouched by what her son and daughter had done to my family, and I felt something cold and steady settle into my chest. Not rage exactly, something quieter and more permanent than rage. Resolve. After the game, Carol walked over to me near the concession stand, all smiles, smelling like the same rose perfume she'd worn for as long as I'd known her. Danny, you should come to Kevin's for dinner sometime. The restaurant's doing so well now, you'd be so proud, all that hard work paying off finally. I smiled back, easy, unreadable. I bet it is, I said. I've actually been wanting to see the book sometime, family business and all right. Her smile flickered for less than a second, barely a shift in the muscles around her eyes, but I caught it, the same flicker I'd caught in Diane's hands at the dresser 3 weeks earlier. These people didn't know that I noticed things. They'd built their whole plan around the idea that I was too trusting, too tired from 12-hour shifts, too busy coaching Little League, and mowing the lawn to ever look closely at anything. That mistake was going to cost them more than they understood. Over the following month, I did something I had never once done in 15 years of marriage. I became quiet and careful, watching everything, saying almost nothing, playing the same steady, predictable husband everyone had always known while a completely different man worked behind my eyes. I requested a full credit report and found a second credit card in my own name that I had never opened, carrying a $4,000 balance. Opened the same month the retirement account had been drained. I discovered, through a slow and gentle conversation with my own mother over coffee, that Diane had quietly asked her, my mother, for a loan 8 months earlier, saying our finances were a little tight right now, while at the exact same time telling me at home that everything was completely fine. Everything had been tight, I now understood, because they had already begun planning to move my money months before they actually took it. There was a night in that stretch of time I still think about often. I couldn't sleep, so I went down to the garage around 1 in the morning to sit in my truck, the only place in the house I could be alone with my own thoughts without Diane asking what was wrong. I found an old shoebox on the shelf above my workbench, one Diane had asked me months earlier to just leave alone. It's just some old receipts. Curiosity, and something colder than curiosity, made me open it. Inside were printed bank statements from an account I didn't recognize, a Ridgeline Grill account, showing a deposit of $50,000 dated almost exactly to the first of the 4 transactions from my retirement fund. Someone had been careless enough, or arrogant enough, to keep physical proof in my own garage. I photographed every page with my phone and put the box back exactly as I'd found it, in exactly the same position, dust undisturbed. I didn't want anyone to know yet what I knew. A man who shows his hand too early loses the game before he's finished counting his cards. I hired an attorney, A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Reyes who specialized in financial fraud within marriages and family estates. I didn't tell Diane. I didn't tell anyone at home. I told my supervisor I needed to leave early some days for doctor's appointments. And instead I sat in Patricia's office going through paperwork line by line, spreading the pages across her conference table like a man laying out a jigsaw puzzle he was terrified to finish. "This is unusually well documented for something this messy," Patricia told me one afternoon, flipping carefully through my gas station notebook. "Most people come to me with vague suspicion and a bad feeling in their gut. You came to me with a paper trail, bank statements, and photographic evidence from a shoebox. Most people don't do that." "I've had time to notice things," I said. "I just didn't want to believe what I was noticing until I couldn't not believe it anymore." Patricia explained that because the retirement account had been solely in my name, with Diane holding only a lapsed power of attorney, this wasn't simply a marital asset dispute to be quietly settled over dinner. Depending on how the funds had been used, and whether Diane's family had knowingly received money they understood to be stolen, there could be both a civil case to recover everything and, potentially, real criminal exposure for forgery and financial fraud, especially given the deliberate structuring of the transactions to avoid the bank's reporting thresholds. "I don't want to destroy her," I told Patricia honestly, meaning it. "I want the truth out. I want my money back. I want my kids to grow up seeing that lying doesn't win, that it never actually wins, no matter how comfortable it looks for a while." "Then we build the case quietly," she said, closing the folder in front of her. "No warning shots, no confrontations you can't take back. When we're ready, we bring everything forward all at once, in a way she can't spin, can't deny, and can't hide from." That became my plan, not revenge born from anger. Revenge built from patience, the way you build anything meant to last, slowly, with your hands steady, checking your work twice. Diane, meanwhile, seemed to believe the storm had quietly passed. She started talking normally again at dinner, mentioning summer plans, asking about the family reunion coming up in July at her parents' place on the lake. I played along. I smiled. I asked Tyler about practice and Emma about her latest science project, something involving mealworms that I honestly didn't fully understand but pretended to for her sake. Inside, I was gathering evidence like a man building a dam, one stone at a time, so that when it finally broke, nothing downstream would survive untouched by what the water carried with it. In May, I found the largest piece of all. I was helping Emma finish her science project on the family laptop in the den one evening when I noticed Diane had accidentally left her email open in another tab, a mistake I don't think she ever realized she made. I wasn't snooping, I want to be honest about that, because integrity still mattered to me even now, even after everything. I wasn't hunting through her private messages looking for something to hurt her with. But there, sitting right on the screen, was an email from Kevin to Diane, sent 4 months earlier, with a subject line that made the room go cold around me. "Ray, Dad won't ever know." I sat there a long moment before I opened it. Then I read every single word twice. Kevin had written to Diane explaining, in careful, almost business-like detail, exactly how they could access the account using the old power of attorney before I had any reason to check whether it had been formally updated after my knee surgery. He'd written, "You know Danny. He trusts you with everything. He won't even check the statements as long as the mortgage keeps getting paid and nothing looks different at home." Diane had replied 4 minutes later, "I feel sick about this, but Mom says family comes first and Danny will understand eventually. I'll figure out how to explain it later if he ever asks." Later if he ever asks. They hadn't planned to tell me at all. Not eventually, not gently, not once the restaurant turned a profit. They had planned to quietly repay it before I ever noticed, treating my life savings, 22 years of my hands on a factory floor, like an interest-free loan they never had to ask permission to take, from a man they'd already decided was too trusting and too tired to look closely. I forwarded that email silently to my own private account, then to Patricia the next morning before my shift even started. I didn't say a word to Diane. Not yet. I needed one more thing first, someone outside the family who could confirm, independently, what I already knew. That someone turned out to be Kevin's own head chef, A young man named Marcus, no relation to my cousin, a strange coincidence of names, who I ran into by chance at the hardware store buying paint for a fence repair. We got to talking, the way men do standing in a checkout line, and somehow the conversation drifted to the restaurant. "Business is better now," he told me, not knowing who I was to Diane, not knowing anything about what had happened. "Kevin got some big investment a few months back, fixed up the whole dining room, new equipment in the kitchen. Real lucky timing, honestly, place was 2 months from closing before that." I asked him, as casually as I could manage, if he knew where the investment came from. Kevin never said exactly, just said it was family money, said his brother-in-law didn't even know yet. He laughed a little, not unkindly, just a young man repeating gossip he didn't understand the weight of. Kind of a weird thing to joke about now that I think of it. I thanked him for the conversation, paid for my paint, and drove home in complete silence. I now had it from 3 separate, independent directions: the bank's own suspicious flag, the email trail between Diane and Kevin, and an employee with no reason to lie confirming that Kevin himself had joked openly about me not knowing. The dam was full. I only needed to choose the moment it would break. That same week, I did something quietly devastating to their plan without either of them ever knowing it had happened. I contacted Kevin's restaurant's business bank, not to interfere with day-to-day operations, but to formally document, through Patricia, a lien notice on any funds traceable back to my retirement account, since it had been used directly to renovate the restaurant. It wasn't an attack. It was simply making certain that if this went to court, the money couldn't quietly disappear into vague business expenses. The way household money so easily vanishes when nobody's watching closely enough. June arrived, and with it, the family reunion at the lake house. Diane's whole family would be there: her mother Carol, her father Walt, her brother Kevin and his wife Renee, aunts, uncles, cousins, nearly 30 people gathered on the deck of a house that, I now understood with a bitterness I tried hard not to let show, had partly been renovated a few years earlier using money Diane had quietly borrowed against our own home equity, for repairs, that had somehow never actually shown up around our own house. I almost didn't go. Patricia advised me carefully that if I wanted a private, controlled confrontation, a family reunion with 30 relatives and a lake full of children was not the setting for it. But I wasn't looking for a private confrontation anymore. Somewhere around the 4th stone I laid on that dam, I had decided that the truth deserved the same audience the lie had enjoyed for months. Every one of these people had smiled at me over the last 6 weeks, some of them knowing exactly what had been taken from me and my children. They could hear the truth in the same room where they'd celebrated their theft with fresh paint and new deck furniture. I brought the notebook. I brought printed copies of the transfer records, the forged authorization, and Kevin's email, all organized in a plain manila folder, nothing dramatic, nothing designed for spectacle. I didn't bring anger with me. I brought the truth, organized and quiet, the way I organize a production line at the plant, every piece exactly where it needs to be, nothing left to chance. Dinner was served on the deck as the sun went down over the water, kids running around the yard with sparklers because Walt always insisted on a bit of the 4th of July spirit, even though it was still only June. Diane looked happy for the first time in weeks, laughing at something her mother had said, her guard fully down. I let her have that moment a little longer than I needed to. Then I stood up. "Before dessert," I said, and the deck went quiet the way it does when a man who never asks for attention suddenly asks for it. "I want to share something with the family. Since we're all here, and since so much of this beautiful evening was made possible by generosity within this family." Carol smiled warmly, completely misreading me. "Well, we do try to look out for each other, Danny. That's what family's for." "That's actually exactly what I wanted to talk about," I said, keeping my voice level, calm, almost gentle. "Looking out for each other. Because 6 weeks ago I discovered that my retirement account, $211,000, 22 years of my work on the factory floor, had been emptied without my knowledge, using a power of attorney that had legally expired years ago to fund Kevin's restaurant and to help pay for some of what's been done around this very house." The silence on that deck was the loudest silence I have ever heard in my life. Somewhere out on the lawn, a sparkler crackled and went out. Kevin's face went completely white. Carol's smile actually stayed frozen in place for several long seconds, like her expression hadn't caught up yet to what her ears had just heard. Diane grabbed my arm, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Danny, please, not like this, please, not in front of everyone." "I have every document," I continued calm, unhurried, the way I'd rehearsed it in Patricia's office a dozen quiet times. "I have the transfer records showing 4 separate withdrawals structured to avoid the bank's fraud alerts. I have the forged authorization. And I have an email, Kevin, where you told my wife I'd never know as long as the mortgage kept getting paid and nothing looked different at home." Walt, Diane's father, a man I had always respected as fundamentally honest even when the rest of his family cut corners, turned slowly to his son, his voice low and heavy. "Kevin, is that true? Look at me and tell me that isn't true." Kevin didn't answer. He just stared down at the table, his jaw working silently. In a family that had spent months rehearsing excuses, that silence was the one thing none of them had prepared for. I wasn't cruel about it, and I want that understood clearly. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone names. I didn't humiliate the children still out on the lawn with their sparklers, blissfully unaware that the adults' whole world had just quietly cracked open behind them. I simply laid the folder on the table, closed it gently, and said, "I'm not here to ruin anyone's summer. I'm here so that the people at this table understand that I know exactly what happened, in full, down to the dates and the dollar amounts. From here forward, this is being handled through my attorney. Not because I want to punish this family for the sake of punishing them. Because I refuse to let my children grow up believing that what happened to their father is normal, or that silence is the price good men are supposed to pay for peace." Then I picked up my keys, told Tyler and Emma we were leaving a little early, and drove home with both of them quiet in the back seat, sensing something enormous had just happened even if they didn't yet understand what. I didn't look back at the deck as I pulled out of the driveway. I had already seen everything I needed to see. The weeks that followed were not simple, and I won't pretend they were. Diane and I separated not long after that night. Not out of hatred, I don't hate her even now, even writing this down, but because trust, once broken that completely and that deliberately, doesn't rebuild itself just because someone says sorry enough times. She did say sorry more than once, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with red eyes, and I believe some part of that apology was genuine. But sorry doesn't refill a retirement account, and it doesn't undo 4 months of an email chain where my own wife carefully discussed with her brother the best way to keep me in the dark about my own life savings. Through Patricia, we reached a settlement over the following months. Kevin's restaurant took out a business loan to repay the full amount, with interest, structured over 3 years and secured directly against the property itself. So there was no way to hide behind a future bankruptcy filing or vague claims of hardship. Carol and Walt, mortified once the full truth was out in the open and impossible to soften, helped cover the first year's payments themselves, more out of shame than pure generosity if I'm being honest. But I accepted it anyway because I had 4 kids' college funds and one man's dignity to think about, not pride. Diane and I divided our remaining assets fairly, working through mediation rather than a courtroom, and I made certain, through my attorney, that any future joint accounts either of us might ever hold with a partner would require dual verified signatures for anything over a small threshold, no shortcuts, no lapsed paperwork left forgotten in a drawer. I didn't press criminal charges against Diane, and I've thought carefully about why more than once in the year since. Not because what she did wasn't serious, it was, and I've never once pretended otherwise, even to myself. But because Tyler and Emma needed a mother who wasn't sitting in a courtroom while they were still learning how to make sense of what had happened to their family, and I decided that some kinds of justice matter more to me than others do. Financial justice, I got in full, dollar for dollar with interest. The dignity of showing my children the plain, undeniable truth without hiding it or drowning it in bitterness, I got that too. For me, that combination was enough. I know not every man in my position would agree, and I don't judge anyone who'd choose differently. Kevin, I understand from people who still talk to me, closed the restaurant permanently about 18 months later anyway, despite the loan, despite the fresh paint, despite everything. Some debts, it turns out, aren't only financial. Some things you take from a family don't come back just because the money eventually does. As for me, it's been almost a year now since that night on the deck. I moved into a smaller house closer to the plant, with a spare room set up for Tyler and Emma, who stay with me every other week and for most of the summer. Tyler asked me once, not long after everything came fully out into the open, why I hadn't just yelled at everyone that night on the deck, why I'd stayed so calm when, in his words, "You had every right in the world to lose it, Dad." I told him the truth, sitting across from him at our new kitchen table on a quiet Tuesday evening. Because the loudest man in the room isn't always the one people remember as strong, son. I wanted you to remember your father as a man who told the truth clearly, laid it out plainly for everyone to see, and let the truth do the work that anger never actually can. Anger fades. People forget what a man was angry about. Nobody forgets the truth, once it's been said out loud in front of everyone who needed to hear it. My retirement account is being rebuilt now, slower than before since I'm starting a portion of it over from nearly nothing. But steadily, the way everything worth having actually gets built, one deposit, one decision, one honest choice at a time. I still want that cabin near Lake Erie someday. Some quiet nights I picture it exactly the way I always have, the dock at sunrise. The water still and gray before the wind picks up. Tyler and Emma grown, maybe with kids of their own someday. All of us out there fishing together like I always planned, long before any of this ever happened. I used to believe a betrayal like this would break a man permanently, the kind of wound you carry the rest of your life without ever fully standing up straight again. I've learned instead that it revealed me, the same way it revealed everyone else at that table on the deck. It showed me exactly who in my family valued me for who I was, and who only valued what I could quietly provide without ever asking a single question. It revealed that I could stay calm under the worst pressure I have ever faced in my life, and that patience, real patience, backed by evidence instead of raw emotion, is its own kind of strength that nobody can talk their way around, no matter how good their excuses sound in the moment. I don't regret staying quiet those first difficult weeks. I don't regret the notebook, or the late nights in Patricia's office going through statements line by line, or waiting until I had every single piece of proof lined up before I ever said a word out loud that couldn't later be denied or twisted into something smaller than it was. Some men fight with their fists when they feel betrayed. I fought with the truth, laid out so plainly and so completely on that table that not one person sitting there could pretend, even to themselves, that they didn't fully understand what I was telling them. That is the kind of father I want my children to remember for the rest of their lives, long after I'm gone. Not the man who yelled the loudest the night he first found out he'd been betrayed. The man who stayed quiet exactly as long as he needed to, and then made absolutely certain the truth was heard, clearly and completely, by every single person who needed to hear it. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Raw Revenge, and tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next story.